Good morning. You're listening to WVUDHD2 Newark, The Basement. I'm Zach Davis, and this is Our Brief Hour, where we celebrate the poetry and prose that makes our brief hour on this earth a beautiful one. Today I want to look at one of Shakespeare's most famous characters, Hamlet, and specifically his soliloquies, because Hamlet spends a whole lot of time thinking and talking to himself about himself. Hamlet is a famously desirable role. A lot of actors really love to play Hamlet. And in fact, a lot of actors say that they'd like to play Hamlet multiple times throughout their career, both because they think they'll bring different things to it over time, to the role, and because they like to see how their own interpretation of Hamlet's situation changes. So just to give a very quick overview for those who are unfamiliar or who have forgotten most of what they learned in high school or college, if that's the last time you read Hamlet. Hamlet is the Prince of Denmark. He's been away at college. His father has been murdered by his uncle. His father, the king, has been murdered by his uncle, who's become king. And his uncle married Hamlet's mother, who is the queen. So Hamlet comes back home. He's sad that his father is dead. He's in mourning. And everyone at the palace is sort of hounding him to just snap out of it and get back to being normal. Then he runs across the ghost of his father, who tells Hamlet that his uncle, in fact, murdered his father. And so Hamlet spends the whole rest of the play trying to will himself to take revenge, to kill his uncle, whose name is Claudius. And Hamlet finally accomplishes this in the last act of the play, although in rather unfortunate circumstances, which we'll hit when we get there. So this is Hamlet's first soliloquy. It happens just after he's been talking to his uncle and his mother, who are both asking him to chill out and start being happy again. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. Oh, God, how weary, stale, flat and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on't. Ah, fie! 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king, that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth, must I remember? Why, she would hang on him, as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet within a month, let me not think on't. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body like Niobe, all tears. Why, she, even she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing of her galled eyes, she married. Oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. Here already we're hearing Hamlet contemplating suicide, and we hear that the thing holding him back at this point, one of the things, is the Christian, and specifically the Catholic, prohibition of suicide. They consider it a sin, and people that commit suicide can't be buried in consecrated ground or get their proper funeral rites, and therefore can't go to heaven. So Claudius, who at this point doesn't know that Hamlet has found out that Claudius is the poisoner, tries to cheer Hamlet up by calling in two of Hamlet's school buddies, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to figure out what's wrong with Hamlet and maybe to kind of jolly him out of it. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern pop up and try to have a chat with Hamlet, and Hamlet sniffs them out right away. He knows that, or he suspects at least, that they've come at Claudius's invitation, and neither of them is very bright, so they can't really think of a lie in time to cover themselves. So they end up admitting to Hamlet that they've been recruited. So Hamlet ends up treating them with contempt for most of the play. But they're asking him, what's wrong, Hamlet? What's going on? And this is what he ends up saying. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof, fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me. One of the interesting things about this little monologue is that it has exclamation marks strewn all over it. When Hamlet starts with "what a piece of work is man," almost every clause has an exclamation point after it. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty, in form and moving! How express and admirable! But to me, it's always seemed very unnatural to deliver it that way, to deliver it as though, exclaiming all of those things, because I don't really think that Hamlet is actually attributing all those things to humans in a real way. I don't think he means it. In other words, I think he's saying a lot of this ironically. He is a scholar, so we get the sense that he's he's sort of absorbed a lot of philosophy at school, and he has this sort of humanistic appreciation for man in the abstract, but when it comes to man as an individual, Hamlet is sort of a misanthrope. He's not actually happy with all that many people other than his buddy Horatio. So I've never been able to really find a way to deliver that particular speech with all the exclamation that it calls for. And the very last line, and yet to me what is this quintessence of dust, picks up something that Shakespeare plays with a whole lot, which is that man returns to dust. Man will eventually become dirt and return to the ground, and all the evidence of his existence will go away. And Hamlet returns to this later as well. And there are other famous sentiments in some of Shakespeare's other plays. One that sticks in the mind is Macbeth's, all our yesterdays have lighted men the way to dusty death. That and we'll also hear this if we have time. I want to hit a play that Shakespeare wrote earlier called Richard II, and Richard goes through a lot of the same mental steps that Hamlet is going through here. So next, there's another blast from the past for Hamlet. There's a company of actors that Hamlet used to love to go watch when he was in school. And one of the few things we get the sense that Hamlet really derives joy from in life is theater. So these players come to Hamlet's castle, and he's thrilled to receive them. And he meets them all as soon as they get in, and he begs the first player, the leader of the troupe, for a speech before they get settled in. And he starts reciting it himself. It's this long poem about the Trojan War. And he can't quite remember it, so he's like, "Yeah, come on, fill in for me." And so the first player picks up where Hamlet is left off and starts reciting this poem. And so this is right after the first player has finished, the acting troupe has gone off to get quartered, and Hamlet is thinking about the poem he's just heard. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage wanned, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing, for Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze, indeed, the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like John a dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing. No, not for a king, upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat was made. Am I a coward? Who calls me villain, breaks my pate across, plucks off my beard and blows it in my face, tweaks me by the nose, gives me the lie the throat, as deep as to the lungs? Who does me this? swoons, I should take it. For it cannot be but I am pigeon-livered, and lack gall to make oppression bitter. Or ere this I should have fatted all the region kites with this slave's awful. Bloody, bawdy, villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain! Oh, vengeance! Why, what an ass am I! This is most brave, that I, the son of a dear father murdered, prompted to my revenge by heaven and hell, must like a whore unpack my heart with words, and fall a-cursing like a very drab, a scullion. Fie upon't! About, my brain. I have heard that guilty creatures, sitting at a play, have been struck by the very cunning of the scene so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions, for murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle. I'll observe his looks. I'll tent him to the quick. If he do but blench, I know my course. The spirit that I have seen may be the devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape, yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. I'll have grounds more relative than this. The play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. The thing that always fascinates me about this particular soliloquy is that Hamlet both celebrates the power of words and theater, specifically, but he also laments how weak and passive they can be. And of course, this is a typical artist thing, isn't it? To talk about how important and moving their own medium is. You know, like, wow, can you believe that? Shakespeare thinks that theater is really awesome and it can move humans to depths of emotion. I mean, the logic here is that just watching a play about someone poisoning someone else is going to make Claudius so overwhelmed that he won't be able to control himself enough to conceal his distaste or his guilt. Like the very fact that this is happening near him is going to elicit a true response. You know, if he can watch it and not be upset by it, he must be innocent. And if he watches it and blenches, he must be guilty. And yet at the same time, Hamlet is criticizing himself for relying only on words. This is most brave, that I, the son of a dear father murdered, prompted to my revenge by everything on the earth, you know, by every means you could think of. All I can do is unpack my heart with words. I can't push myself to actually act. And this is a problem that Macbeth has too, although he has a wife who's able to give him that final nudge that puts him over the edge to commit the murder that he's been planning. But Hamlet, for this whole play, Hamlet is just kind of spinning his wheels. He can't get himself onto that next step, onto the step of actually killing Claudius. And he comes so close. There's actually at one point where the play has just ended, and it turns out that Claudius has reacted in this incredibly over-the-top way. So we have a pretty good sense that Claudius is the murderer, and Claudius is kneeling in the hall after everyone is kind of dispersed for the night, and praying and talking about how terrible his sin is and how he begs forgiveness, but he can't because he still has the thing that he killed to get, the kingship. And Hamlet is standing behind him with his knife drawn, about to run him through when he says, "Oh, wait a minute, I can't do that," because Claudius is confessing. And in the Catholic belief, if you've confessed and received forgiveness, then your sins are washed away. You don't have any anymore. And if you die without, sins officially to your tally, then you go to heaven. So if Claudius has just confessed, he's going to heaven. And Hamlet won't let that happen. He can't let Claudius have peace in the afterlife. So he waits. He puts his sword away and says, I'll have to do it later. He comes so close over and over again, but his words, his reasoning, his extreme, the amount of time that he spends in his own head trying to figure himself out and trying to understand every situation to the utmost, defeats him again and again. He keeps talking himself out of it, and he's blaming theater in some ways for the same things, because what's going on in theater, it's not real. You're seeing all these emotionally potent things, but they're not real. They're not happening. They have no lasting effect, or at least so Hamlet thinks in his current state of upset. Here we need to pause for a minute for a quick promo, so don't go away.
For the greatest hits from the 1390s to the new millennium, tune in to The Green Willow, Celtic music, every Wednesday night from 7 to 9 p.m. on WVUD and WVUD HD1, Newark.
Welcome back. Next up is perhaps the most famous thing that Shakespeare has ever written, and it needs no other introduction. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and, by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolent office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. So we're hearing a lot of the same things here. Hamlet is asking a question that I think most of us have asked in our darker moments, which is, why do we keep soldiering on? Why do we keep waking up every morning, keep fighting to draw every breath, when we could save ourselves from all this pain by dying, by committing suicide? And it's something that he can't quite bring himself to do again. And it's in the same way, it's because he's so far in his own head. He's so conscious and obsessed with finding every possible implication of his impulses that he realizes that for him at least, and in his mind for everyone else, what happens after death might be even scarier and more awful than what happens during life. And this is why we can't ever bring ourselves to willingly die, at least in almost all cases. And of course, for one thing, this is an incredibly depressing view, that the only reason we die is because we're afraid that the only reason we live is because we're afraid that dying might be even worse. Again, also, we hear him talking about words and about their limitations. And in this case, he phrases it in terms of conscience, the words that bubble around in our conscience make cowards of us all. And the pale cast of thought is what prevents us from acting. So in a way, here's this academic, this intellectual who aches to not live the examined life, to just be able to have an impulse and do it, which is an interesting thing to hear. And part of me wonders if a lot of us have felt that too. This is a soliloquy, the to be or not to be soliloquy, that has become so famous that there's sort of a backlash. It's in vogue to criticize it as not being all that great. Like it's become overrated, and I personally don't really agree with that. I think that it might not be moving the story forward. It might not be utterly necessary within the compass of the play itself, of Hamlet. But it's a gorgeous piece of prose, and it's asking a fairly timeless question, even if it's asking it in an incredibly depressing way. And the number of phrases that have worked their way into everyday speech from this soliloquy is very high. There's, of course, to be or not to be. There's to sleep, perchance to dream. There's shuffled off this mortal coil. There's death, the undiscovered country. And it's just an incredibly powerful speech, I think. But it's also an incredibly repetitive speech. And this gets to something that I've personally found the more I study Shakespeare. When we're in high school reading Shakespeare and in college reading Shakespeare and going to these plays without a whole lot of experience, the language can seem impenetrable and hard to understand. And not just that he uses esoteric words, but that his constructions and the things he's expressing are kind of hard to fathom. And one of the reasons I think that we have trouble is that Shakespeare repeats himself a whole lot more than we'd expect him to. That in some ways, every Shakespeare play has a lot less substance than it seems like on the surface, because so much of it is just characters saying the same basic thing in slightly different ways. And part of this, I think, is because Shakespeare was basically writing to a deadline all the time. He needed to churn out these plays quickly so the theater troupe that he was working for could put them on, and they could remain novel. They could always have new stuff going on, so people would still want to come to see them. So Shakespeare is like any genre fiction writer in that sense. He needs to keep publishing if he wants to stay relevant. So, of course, if you're having trouble filling out Act 4 or something, one of the things you can do is just repeat what you were saying in Act 3, but in slightly different ways. So, Hamlet is complaining here that he's having trouble moving forward. He's having trouble taking that next step. Conscience does make cowards of us all. And, what does that sound like? That sounds a lot like what a rogue and peasant slave am I, which we just heard in Act 3. And I think that as modern readers, we're kind of expecting things to be established and then the author move on fairly quickly. Like, we're not looking for the amount of repetition that Shakespeare uses. So we get an impression of what these words mean, but we think, well, that can't be it because he already said that. Like, I must be misunderstanding. When in reality, we're understanding just perfectly. I think our instincts are fairly good when it comes to Shakespeare. I think that we can hear what he's saying and have a decent feel for it. But then in a lot of cases, I think we second guess ourselves, much like Hamlet is doing himself. And the to be or not to be speech is replete with these repetitions that make us wonder, am I really getting it? When he's listing off this whole number of problems that humans face in life, and he's saying the same thing over and over again, right? What are all the things that are bad about life? Well, there's the oppressor's wrong, there's the whips and scorns of time, there's the proud man's contumely, there's the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, fardels that you have to bear, grunting and sweating under a weary life. Like he's saying the same thing over and over again. So what we might expect to hear is a sentence or two in a novel that was written 10 years ago or something. So we're listening to this and saying, like, well, he can't really be saying that again, can he? So I just must be missing something. And I think in a lot of cases, we might actually be better off if we sort of went with our instinct on a lot of these things. And of course, I don't understand every word he's saying too. Like I have a sense what fardels are, but I wouldn't know what it is unless I looked it up. But you don't really need to know every single word to get the sense. And maybe that's another reason that people criticize the to be or not to be speech, because it is sort of reiterating both itself and things that have come before. But I think that kind of overlooks the point. And for that matter, as people who've studied Shakespeare joke about, Shakespeare never came up with an original plot idea in his life. He's borrowed almost every single one of his basic plots from stuff that existed before. Henry V, there are plays about Henry V that came before his play about Henry V. Romeo and Juliet was already written, and it's called Romeo and Juliet, right? Like, he's not doing anything terribly new here. So the novelty that he brings and the value that he brings is really in the depth that he manages to infuse into these forms that that already exist, that he's just sort of, he's not even really adapting them. He's just sort of digging in farther than anyone has before. And this sort of work he does with, for example, the to be or not to be speech is developing that psychological depth that you don't really find anywhere else in the writings of this time, or in fact, really anywhere else in Western literature before Shakespeare. This incredible focus on the inner workings of the mind. So I think people who criticize the to be or not to be speech in a lot of ways are kind of missing the point, that it's not necessarily we need this to be accomplishing anything that other than being beautiful language and being even more insight into Hamlet's mind. So this next scene, Hamlet sort of snaps, and he decides that this is it. I'm not going to keep thinking myself out of this problem anymore. He's been shipped off to England for a series of events that isn't all that important in the for this show. And the goal of getting him to England is either to have the English king kill him or keep him in England so he doesn't come back and cause any more trouble in Denmark. But he sniffs out that plot. He gives his captors, including Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the slip, and in fact arranges matters so that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern get killed instead. And he's making his way back to Denmark when he runs across this army that's planning on crossing Denmark to fight for this little tiny piece of land, I believe in Norway. And he's shocked. He asks the captain or possibly the messenger, I don't remember exactly who, of this army, where are you going? And the messenger says, well, it's kind of ridiculous, really. We're going to fight for this tiny little piece of land, which isn't even big enough to give us space to bury all the people who will die in the fight for it. It's like so ridiculously small. And Hamlet, in a move that might surprise us, instead of thinking, God, what a terrible waste, thinks, I should be so decisive. I should be able to be like that, to just make this decision and go for it. I want this piece of land, so I'm going to go kill everyone on it, regardless of the cost. How all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. What is a man, if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more. Sure, he that made us with such a large discourse, looking before and after, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fust in us unused. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom and ever 3 parts coward, I do not know why yet I live to say this thing's to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. Examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army, of such mass and charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw, when honor's at the stake. How stand I, then, that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep? While to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men, that, for a fantasy and trick of fame, go to their graves like beds, fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain. Oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody, or be nothing worth. So, wow, does this sound familiar? He's thinking, I have this incredible reason to take revenge, and I'm not doing it. This prince, the one leading this army, is content to sacrifice so many of his men just to pick up this tiny little piece of land, whereas I have much more reason to be fighting, and I'm still not doing it. One of the interesting things here, and I think a very subtle observation of humans that Shakespeare makes, is that Hamlet sees everything that's going on in his world around him as a reflection of himself and his own state. How all occasions do inform against me. Of course, like the prince isn't doing this in reaction to anything that Hamlet is thinking about, but Hamlet can only see it in relation to himself, and he can only interpret this prince's decisions in terms of the same issues that Hamlet is going through. He's thinking, well, this prince must be doing this for the sake of honor, right? So how sad is it that I can't do something for the sake of honor too? Hamlet makes it back to Denmark, and he's oh, actually, before we hit this next scene, we need to take a quick break for a public service announcement. Be right back.
True or false? Roundabouts have proven to be safer and easier to navigate than other forms of intersections. True. And roundabouts are a safer alternative for older drivers making left-hand turns. Older drivers, get the facts. Visit safeandmobiledelaware.org. That's safeandmobiledelaware.org.
Welcome back. We join Hamlet back on the soil of his home country, back in Denmark. He's sneaking around outside the castle. He's just met his buddy Horatio, who's been taking a stroll around or something. And he comes upon a grave digger, digging out a grave. We learn a bit later that this grave is for Hamlet's sort of ex-girlfriend, whom he didn't treat very well during the course of the play, and who has died, and it may have been suicide, and it may not have been. It's unclear. But at this point, Hamlet doesn't know that the grave is for Ophelia. So he's looking at this gravedigger working, and the gravedigger is being jolly, because, of course, it's just a job to him. And he's tossing out the bones that were in the hole that he's digging out. So Hamlet comes up to him, and they have this very witty little banter back and forth. And then Hamlet sees one of the skulls, and he's wondering who this person was. And he says, well, maybe it's a lawyer. And he sees another skull, and he wonders who this was. Maybe it was a merchant. And he sees a third skull. Actually, the gravedigger holds it up and says, hey, this was the court jester. Well, he's not going to make any more jokes, is he? And Hamlet, who knew the court jester, says this. Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rims at it. Here hung those lips, that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment, that were wont to set the table on a roar? Not one now to mock your own grinning, quite chapfallen. Now get you to my lady's chamber, and tell her, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come. Make her laugh at that. Prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing. Dost thou think Alexander looked to this fashion at the end? And smelt so. Ugh. To what base uses we may return, Horatio. Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole? No, faith, not a jot, but to follow him thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it, as thus. Alexander died. Alexander was buried. Alexander returneth into dust. The dust is earth, of earth we make loam, and why of that loam, whereto he was converted, might not they stop a beer barrel? Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, to that earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter flaw. Even the most rare and celebrated among us die, come to dust, and dust is earth, and so they become utterly common and anonymous. Even Alexander, who conquered the known world, even Caesar, who assumed more or less sole leadership of Rome. They all smell terrible when they die. They all get stuck in the ground. They all look the same. We see here that Hamlet is sort of transitioning from thinking of death as almost desirable. He speaks of it in almost longing terms, almost like a lover when he's giving his to be or not to be speech. But here he's seeing it as ugly and disgusting. And for me at least, I get the sense that this is kind of what's bringing Hamlet back to himself. This changing view of death. Death is something unfortunate, when before he finds it something almost to be wished for. Well, I think he says explicitly, it's a consummation devoutly to be wished. And right after this, he sees that the grave is for Ophelia, and he is very upset about that. And Ophelia's brother, Laertes, who is mourning her death and blames Hamlet for it in some sense, because Hamlet accidentally killed their father, the father of Laertes and Ophelia, and this is what filled Ophelia with grief and may have made her so distracted she died, or may have actually led her to commit suicide. So Laertes blames Hamlet for this, and Hamlet sees for the first time someone he actually loves, someone he knew very well, dead. And it sort of comes home to him in a way that I don't think it has any time before in the play, that she's gone. That death means she's gone for good. Yorick is gone for good too. Ophelia is dead. She's returning to the worms. Let her paint an inch thick. All throughout his opus, we get the sense that Shakespeare really despises people who try to make themselves artificially women, specifically because he's talking about makeup, who put on lots of artificial aids to improve their appearance. So let her paint an inch thick. Let her put on as much makeup as she wants. She's going to die and rot in the end, too. And once Hamlet realizes that, I get the sense that he kind of is able to look back on the sort of temporary madness that he's experienced, due to a whole manner of circumstances. Obviously, the sort of the abandonment of his mother marrying his uncle, the grief over his father's death, this huge set of confusion. He's been disrupted from his normal place. He's at home at university. That's where he wants to be, but he's been called back to Denmark, which he thinks of as hell on earth. All these things have sort of conspired to push him to this exquisite peak of madness and despair. But all of a sudden, Ophelia's death, Yorick's death, snaps him back to real life, to the moment. He realizes how frail life is. And I get the sense, although he never says this, that how, it's also desirable that he wishes Ophelia were still alive. During the funeral, which Hamlet's hiding at this point, so no one knows he's there, Hamlet's mother says, "I wish you'd become my daughter, Ophelia. I wish you'd married Hamlet." And maybe Hamlet wishes that too, for as poorly as he treated Ophelia during the course of the play. But sadly, this sort of return to reason comes a little too late for Hamlet. While this is all going on, Claudius and Laertes are plotting on how to kill Hamlet, because they're upset that Hamlet has come back. Claudius is the one who tried to get Hamlet sent to England. And so they decide that what they're going to do is pretend that Claudius has made this kind of jovial bet with Laertes, that Hamlet would be able to beat Laertes at fencing, the first one to score 3 touches on the other with a sword wins. And Laertes is, excellent with the foil, apparently, and Hamlet is too, because one of the things you do when you're a prince, as you're just kind of hanging around, having no job to do, is practice fencing. So what they're going to do, first of all, is just trust that Laertes is even more skillful, so he can just kill Hamlet. But if that doesn't work, Claudius has a goblet that he's going to poison. He's going to pour wine into it and poison the wine and offer it to Hamlet. Like, hey, have a drink between touches. And if that doesn't work, Laertes has a poison that he bought in foreign parts, which is incredibly deadly to the touch. So if worst comes to worst, he's going to smear the poison on the tip of his sword and stab Hamlet with it. And if he has to, he'll just kind of stab Hamlet between points as they're both chilling out, getting ready for the next point, which is incredibly unsportsmanlike. But to Laertes at this point, killing Hamlet, revenging himself upon Hamlet, is the most important thing. So at this point, Hamlet doesn't know that. Hamlet is hanging out with Horatio when a retainer comes to him to tell him about this bet and say, come on to the main hall so we can have this fencing match. And Hamlet immediately has a bad feeling about this. And Horatio does too. Horatio says, well, you haven't been training, have you? Laertes is going to, beat the crap out of you. And Hamlet says, no, I'm better than you think. I'll be just fine for this. But at the same time, he has the sense that this might be it. This is odd enough and, sort of portentous enough that maybe this is when he dies. So he says to Horatio, as Horatio is begging him not to do this, if he has any misgivings at all, "But thou wouldst not think how ill all's here about my heart. But it is no matter. It is but foolery. But it is such a kind of gain-giving as would perhaps trouble a woman. We defy augury. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man has aught of what he leaves, what is to leave betimes?" I just think this is a beautiful little collection of words. Hamlet is really kind of at peace with whatever comes his way in a way that he hasn't been before. And now that he's seen death, he has a much more realistic sense of what that actually entails. He's not playing around in the hypothetical anymore. We defy augury. Our lives aren't predictable, and however much we think otherwise, we don't really have a whole lot of ability to govern what happens. Augury is prediction, and specifically augurs, the people who were doing augury would examine the entrails of dead animals to try to predict what the future would hold. But augury means more generally trying to figure out what the future holds. Destiny. We defy destiny. There's something special. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. Every little thing that happens, be it coincidence or not, there's something beautiful in that. Things happen one after another, controllable or not. But there's a certain divinity in that. There's a certain beautiful inevitability in something as small and inconsequential as the fall of a sparrow. These are depressing lines. Since no man has aught of what he leaves, what is it to leave betimes? You can't take it with you. You end up dead with nothing but a skull. Your body is dust, just like Alexander's and Yorick's and Ophelia's, and your dirt ends up getting mushed up and used to stop up holes in a barrel. There is no dignity in death, but there's also no identity in death. So, what does it matter? He's willing to go to this fencing match, even though he has a good idea that he's going to die in it. Because there's a special providence in whatever happens. If it be not now, it will be now. If it be now, it is not to come. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all, and he's ready. So, in this sort of newly open-eyed state, this clear-eyed state, Hamlet comes to the fencing match and shakes Laertes' hands and says, "Laertes, I have done thee wrong." And he begs forgiveness from Laertes. And Laertes at first kind of sullenly says, "Yeah, well, sure." But Hamlet is being sincere here. He's genuinely, at least I think, begging forgiveness from Laertes. And of course it's arguable how much at fault Hamlet is here, although he certainly hasn't behaved very well, and he perhaps accidentally, perhaps not accidentally, killed Laertes' father. So he's, he does have some blood on his hands in a sense. But he's doing something he hasn't done before, which is apologizing and asking forgiveness. He's being human for the first time here, and maybe that's what it comes down to. For all the grief and for all the introspection we see from Hamlet, he's sort of been this supernatural entity, almost, throughout the play. He has this sort of ghostly existence within the castle. He doesn't really associate with anyone any more than he can. But here, he's a full, earthy human at last. And perhaps what the implication is that it's only really when you're viscerally connected with the fact that you're going to die, with the fact that your life is a series of coincidences, happy or otherwise. That's the only point when you're truly human. And maybe that's why there's a special providence in all these acts, because they're what makes you human, your connection to them, even if they be as sad as the fall of a sparrow. So Hamlet is newly aware, he has a new appreciation for this truth, and he shakes Laertes' hands, and he acts generally, like a decent human. And they have the fencing match, and Hamlet is much better than Laertes. He's winning. He has 2 touches to Laertes' 0. And through a calamitous series of events, Claudius offers him the poisoned wine, and he says, "No, not now. I'm not thirsty. I'll drink afterwards." So Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, says, "I'll drink the wine. I'll drink a toast to my dear Hamlet." So she drinks the wine. So of course we know that's it for Gertrude. And Laertes switches sword, so he has the sword with the poison on the tip. And between points, he stabs Hamlet. So Hamlet is, of course, we know now, inevitably going to die. And Hamlet chases Laertes around because he's angry. Like, what did you just do? That was a very unsportsmanlike thing to do, wasn't it? And he disarms Laertes and ends up picking up Laertes' sword and stabbing Laertes with it. So now Laertes is toast too. And Laertes, dying, spills the beans. He says, "Hamlet, that sword tip is poisoned. I'm dying. You're dying. I ask your forgiveness as I give it to you." And so they forgive each other, and then Laertes dies, and Hamlet advances on Claudius. Gertrude has just died as well, from the poison in the wine. So Hamlet advances on Claudius, and he forces Claudius to drink the wine too. And Claudius doesn't really have any alternative but to do it. So Hamlet is finally avenged, right? Claudius is dead. And what I've always wondered is whether, Hamlet couldn't push himself to enact this revenge for his father. Like, maybe they were distant, maybe for most of his time as an adult, he was at school, so he wasn't really in touch with his father. But the death of his mother is what finally pushes Hamlet to his revenge. But be that as it may, Hamlet is dying, and he's lying on the floor, and Horatio takes his head into his lap and cradles his head. And Hamlet says, "Oh, I die, Horatio. The potent poison quite o'ercrowds my spirit. I cannot live to hear the news from England, but I do prophesy the election lights on Fortinbras. He has my dying voice. So tell him, with the occurrence more or less, which have solicited. The rest is silence." Of course, the last line is beautiful. The rest is silence, and he dies. But I've always thought the line, "I cannot live to hear the news from England," is also beautiful, too. It reminds me of something Falstaff says in Henry IV, Part 2. "We have heard the chimes at midnight," reminiscing on this old time he's had with an old friend who actually he's trying to shake down for money. We've heard we've lived a full life, haven't we? And Falstaff has this apprehension that something awful is going to happen to him in the near future. So he's reminiscing on times to past, and Hamlet is thinking about times to come that he won't be alive for. "I cannot live to hear the news from England." Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. I won't be able to get to Richard II, so tune in next week for a look at Richard II, a very sad monarch who in a lot of ways prefigures Hamlet. This play came before Hamlet. Thank you for tuning in, as always. This is Our Brief Hour on WVUD HD2 Newark, The Basement. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next Friday at 7 o'clock sharp. Till then, take care.